Welcome to this lecture on Emil Durkheim and sociological theory. In this lecture, I would first like to present on Emil Durkheim's life and works, then situate his thought in the 19th century conversation he had with prior classics, and then deal with the mandatory reading for today, that is the division of labor, as well as on his greatest empirical work, The Suicide. So slight content warning here. I conclude by pointing to some legacies of Durkheim and current sociological thought. So Durkheim, here he is as a young man, was born in 1858 at a time when France was governed by Napoleon III as a constitutional monarchy with conservative authoritarian traits even. Napoleon III had put an end to the Second Republic of France in 1852 and reigned until 1870-71 when he lost the war against Germany, which gave place to the Third Republic of France, and Durkheim became a lifelong Republican. That means in favor of this Third French Republic. Durkheim was born in provincial France, that is Lorraine, and is of Jewish background. And this put him both geographically and socially at the periphery of French society, and his biography may be interpreted as a strive towards moving into the center of France, that is ultimately Paris, where he already studied at the ENS, the École Normale Supérieure, that is an elite school still around for the humanities in the heart of Paris. He then moved again to the provinces, taught at a lycée in Bordeaux for a long time to ultimately become the first European even, but also French sociology professor, that is for science of education and sociology. On his path, he also studied in Germany in 1885 and became acquainted with the German Historical School and the experimental psychology around Wilhelm Wundt, first chair of experimental psychology. Even though he was a contemporary of Max Weber, they never really met and probably were not aware of their major works. Durkheim lived at a time of the so-called Belle Epoque, that is the prosperous, economically prosperous, and very optimistic time of the end of the 19th century, where belief in scientific and economic progress was very well developed. At the same time, culturally, there was a certain pessimism in the arts and literature that is also called the fin de siècle. So a certain skepticism about whether the economic and scientific progress was only positive. And we will see in his works on the suicide that there is some resonance of this mood in his own works. So Durkheim is probably the first author we deal with here who was indeed a founder of an own school. So he had really disciples who occupied then also chairs in the French academia. And Durkheim also institutionalized sociology formally through, for instance, this Année sociologique, which became a main publication. And he did so also against dominant social science currents of his time. So against, for instance, geography or attempts to establish something like sociology as a geographical discipline, or also against the sociology of Gabriel Tarde, who was in favor of a more relational approach in sociology. Network sociologists nowadays still cite him, and Tarde considered the principle of imitation as one of the dominant principles that Durkheim criticized. So there was something like a Durkheimian movement, and not a coincidence that many of Durkheim's writings are also shaped by this academic politics he was involved in when founding an entire discipline. Durkheim was also politically active. He was, as a good Republican, close to the founders of the French Republic and the also ideological founders. Léon Bourgeois' book and concept of solidarity was also quite key to Durkheim, as we will see. But he was also friends with the socialist leader Jean Jaurès at the time. Um, so quite open also ideologically when compared, for instance, to the conservative German founders of sociology. Durkheim's life was characterized by probably two major crises that also informed his work. The first one was the defeat of the French army against the Germans, the outbreak of the Commune in 1871, where Durkheim diagnosed the French Republic of being too little socially and morally integrated. And in reaction to this defeat, then France had a kind of cultural renaissance with institutions like Sciences Po, for instance, the social science school being founded in order also to catch up scientifically, but Durkheim would say also morally. The second great crisis occurred in the 1890s when Captain Dreyfus was convicted of treason. So that was a captain of the French army who was accused of spying for the Germans and of transferring French army secrets to the German embassy in Paris. He was convicted in 1894 in something what later became known as the Dreyfus Affair. And soon it turned out that Dreyfus, who was of Jewish descent, was innocent. But despite this finding by the courts, the military insisted on Dreyfus' imprisonment. Émile Zola, the famous novelist, wrote J'accuse, so I accuse, a pamphlet in favor of Dreyfus, which started a huge debate between two camps. The Dreyfusards were in favor of the liberation of Dreyfus, insisting also on the principles of the Third Republic, whereas the opposed camp then was in favor of keeping Dreyfus in prison and generally holding up also more conservative principles in the Republic. This entire affair was obviously also one about anti-Semitism in the French Republic, and in general showed the cleavage lines in French society in a republic which was far from being a stable polity. France at the time was still forming itself into a nation. So in this book cited below here by Weber, Peasants into Frenchmen, Weber, that is not Max Weber, describes how France was geographically divided between the rural hinterlands, Paris, between different language groups, different dialects, and the institutions of the Third French Republics, that is the education system, for instance, were all meant to unite France as a nation. And Durkheim was among the Dreyfusards in this debate and in favor of strengthening the Third Republic. And this all influenced his works, as we will see. So he considered then also sociology as a moral science, as he put it, in order to strengthen the Republic against both the outer enemies, so Imperial Germany, that again attacked in 1914, but also the inner enemies, so conservative monarchists, for instance. And sociology should be a tool, according to Durkheim, to strengthen this republic. It was also meant to be a broader movement for educational reform, as I said. So the French state was still rolling out basic elementary and secondary schools throughout France in the Third Republic. Durkheim wrote the following major works during his lifetime. So first of all, there's the Division of Labor, which is an outgrowth of Durkheim's PhD thesis, in fact. And this came out in 1893 with a second edition later, which you read also for today, second preface then also. The sociological rules are the main works in which Durkheim thinks about what sociology should be as a discipline. This is followed then by the suicide, which I will present also in this lecture, in which Durkheim advances the empirical research in sociology by studying the phenomenon of suicide empirically. In 1912, there's the publication of the Elementary Forms of Religious Life. This is a book that is based on Durkheim's secondary study of early anthropologist writings of native Australians and their social institutions. Durkheim basically spent many hours in the National Library to read these sources to then build an argument on how religious habits form the backbone of societies, not only pre-modern ones, but also modern ones. Besides these works, there are many lectures also that came upon us and correspondence, but these are the major works to know. Durkheim's thought is situated at the crossroads of various currents of his time. You may have also noticed this in the footnotes. So first of all, he was influenced by Comtean positivism. So Auguste Comte, we have already heard this, often attributed to be the founder of sociology, at least when it comes to popularizing the term sociology, was a French social scientist or philosopher rather of the earlier 19th century, who put forward the idea of sociology as social physics, as a kind of natural science for a society. And Durkheim was strongly influenced by this idea to develop sociology as a science and also to use it in order to improve societies morally. Durkheim was also influenced by Herbert Spencer's functionalism. Durkheim himself became a functionalist, even though he disagreed with some of the liberal presuppositions in Spencer's work. Durkheim was equally influenced by the Neo-Kantians of then French descent, Renouvé and Bourdieu. Neo-Kantians, we learned this already in the Weber lecture. That was a current towards the end of the 19th century that revived Kant's ideas and that mainly argued for a distinct realm of social scientific epistemology. So a methodology and epistemology in favor of describing the world of values and not the world of the natural sciences. And it was also a current that argued in favor of a value-neutral kind of social science.